This week we're doing things a bit differently. We're taking a different direction. I'm going to show you how I paint this cityscape using cold wax and oils. Let's go. Welcome back to my channel for another art tutorial, albeit a slightly different one. We're this week painting a cityscape, something we haven't done as yet on this channel. I'm going to share some tips and techniques throughout this video to greatly improve your work. In fact, at the end I'm going to share something that was somewhat of a surprise. It came organically, it wasn't supposed to be part of the video, but it's something I learned a long time ago, and it's, if you want to call it a hack, it's a way to improve your composition almost instantly. So stick around for that, it's towards the end. If you are new here, my name is Zoran and I'm a professional artist based in Canada, just on the outskirts of Toronto, a little town called Oakville. And on here we do all sorts of different things, art related, experimentation, interesting mark making, really fundamentally that's what I teach on here and when I have time in real life. So if that is of interest to you, please do consider subscribing. I want to thank everybody who commented last week on the figurative work that I presented. It's very heartwarming and welcoming, and I'm glad that we're able to build this community where we can share ideas, grow together. Really, I'm growing as well with all the works that I present here to you. But this week, as I said, it's going to be slightly different. We are painting the cityscape. I didn't want this channel to be exclusively about figurative work or portrait work. I have devoted the first, whatever it was, a dozen or so videos to that because it's easy to sort of share some concepts, fundamental concepts of good painting through figurative work. But as I said, cityscape and landscape is something that I've done exclusively for years prior to doing any figurative work. And as I said, I want this channel to be about all sorts of different mediums and subject matter. So this week we're doing this cityscape, but next week I feel another figurative work coming on, so do stick around for that. So this week we're doing this cityscape. It is actually a continuation from virtually all the videos I've done thus far on this channel, and it's particularly the last couple videos where we are applying oil painting over a substrate. In this case it's mylar. I've covered that previously as well, but we're applying oil paint mixed with cold wax. So the last two videos, as I said, were exactly of that nature, and furthermore a lot of the mark making and the tools that I employ here are very similar, if not identical, to the previous two videos and some of the ones prior to them. And as you can see here, I'm using a brass squeegee to scrape away paint and apply paint and so on and so forth, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So firstly, for all of you that are new here and didn't have a chance to view the previous couple videos, what is cold wax? Just shortly, cold wax is essentially a soft paste made from beeswax that's mixed with solvent like turpentine or odorless mineral spirits, and sometimes it has a resin added to it. So it's essentially a paste that, unlike encaustic, which is a traditional wax paint, it doesn't require heating to activate. So it stays workable at room temperature, and it imparts a certain velvety matte feel to your paint even before you apply it on your canvas, or in this case, as I said, mylar. You'll see it matting the paint, if you want to call it, on your palette. Now the focus of this week's video is more on creating drama or mood with, well, in this case cityscape work, but in reality it can be applied to all sorts of different genres. If you are interested in learning more about cold wax and its applications and benefits and so on and so forth, I recommend you watch the previous two videos. I will link them below as well as at the end of this video. So creating drama in a cityscape requires a thoughtful approach really to composition, color, and, as you can imagine, tools and techniques. Here I'm using something that I haven't covered as yet, I don't believe, and this is a catalyst squeegee. I don't know what they call it. Unlike the silicone brush tools that I've covered extensively, this thing has a certain heft and bulk, and I find it quite irreplaceable tool. It has two sides. You can obviously apply paint as I am doing here. You can scratch away paint. I'll zoom in a second now for you to see just the kind of marks that this tool makes as I'm applying similar marks with a squeegee brush. But prior to this, in this video, you saw me use, as I said, that brass squeegee, which in itself can be used to apply paint or remove paint, depending on the angle that you use it on your substrate. And you even saw me use something that might be familiar to you, an IKEA, I think that's like a 10-inch or 12-inch squeegee they use for your windows. I don't have one of these in the artist quality variety, so I just go with whatever is available. And I usually use that tool for, pulling out certain lines, especially in architectural painting like this, cityscapes of sorts. But it's not unknown to me that I can use it in figurative work or even landscape work where there aren't any converging lines and so on and so forth. So the first tip that I have with regards to increasing mood or drama is the tools that you are using. So at the beginning of this painting, you saw me put down some initial marks with a brayer over that acrylic black gesso underpainting, and the way that I applied them as I am applying some of these subsequent layers are somewhat intuitively. Now I am cognizant of the drawing and of course of perspective, which is very important, but the lines are not conformed, if I can say, to the drawing itself entirely. So the first layer, second layer, and third layer, I'm doing my best to draw, but the tools that I'm using, and in fact for this painting there are no brushes, there are only these catalyst tools and brayers and squeegees. I'm applying this as if I was drawing it with the smallest of brushes. So that's essentially a tip that I learned a long time ago. Whatever tool that you're using, get a size bigger. So if you're used to painting with brushes, which a lot of us are, if you're using an inch brush, take a 2-inch brush and try to make the exact same stroke with that 2-inch brush. And the dynamics of that stroke will be sometimes a surprise, a lot of times it won't, and you'll have to erase it, which is the nature of painting in general. There's a lot of that goes on. You see me now with this zoomed in viewpoint, how I'm using this catalyst tool, this squeegee, to scrape away some of the underlayers. And this is what cold wax, if you recall from last week, allows you to do. Depending on how hard you push, you can certainly remove paint all the way down to the substrate, to the dry layer really, or as I am doing now, apply paint on top of that, the exact same tool. So the versatility of these tools is endless. The big huge positive beyond that is that you don't have to clean them. So I'm known to apply varying values of color if you want in subsequent strokes. They always used to teach us, stick to your lights or stick to your darks, and don't sort of deviate too much, but I can't do that. So I'm all over the canvas when I apply different strokes. I put down a light, wipe away my squeegee or whatever it is that I'm using, and pick up new crisp color note, as I call them, and apply it. So your tools and the techniques that you apply them with are very important to creating mood within your cityscapes. Beyond the squeegee tools that we talked about, you can certainly experiment with palette knives. I have used them here in this painting. You can always also try certain reductive methods of paint removal through use of sponges or paper towels and so on and so forth. But for cityscape painting, depending on obviously what tools you're using and the way that you are applying them, you can create certain dynamic, non-formulaic, blurry effects, certain soft versus hard edge dynamic that If you're strictly painting based on certain linearity, if you want, of underlying drawing, it will be lost. There's a certain mystery that's created through these kind of mark makings. The second, and arguably the most important way that you can create drama through your cityscape work is through careful composition design. So knowing how to direct the eye for maximum impact. So what essentially we have here is a cityscape that doesn't necessarily have a central focus per se like you would have in a figurative work, but the design itself is the focal point. So the balance of light and dark, careful placement of negative and positive shapes, certain dynamic angles and perspectives. Here we have, for example, a relatively low horizon line that accentuates the tall buildings simply because of their placement, but also because they are bathed in this warm sunset light. It creates a certain sense of awe, or maybe unease if you want. Beyond these concepts, in your own work, you can also experiment with maybe steep vanishing points, or maybe exaggerated perspective lines, moving the horizon line higher, which can sometimes forcibly lead the eye into a certain direction, certain focal point, which, as I said here, it's mostly just about design and color. You can always add strong focal points beyond what I was doing here with, I don't know, bright neon signs, or maybe a distant illuminated window, or even a silhouette of somebody walking across the road against a light source, sort of like a star of your painting if you want. Here I've added another cropped view of just some of the marks and how they appear. As you recall, I put that warm sort of raw umber with yellow ochre base on top of the black gesso, and I'm applying this warm blue for the background with that catalyst squeegee tool. The last way that you can create drama or certain mood, or convey certain mood in your cityscape painting, is through the use of color. So as I said previously, this painting is mostly just about composition and mark making, but also the way that I've designed it and the way that I've applied color is 70 or 80% realistic and maybe 20 to 30% intuitive or stylized. As you can see here, you have, as I said, warm buildings against a cool foreground that is relatively cool throughout, and not necessarily void of color, but maybe void of interesting color, to which I've chosen to add this warm, relatively warm, sort of turquoise blue to create interest, essentially, to add more interest to the foreground and to accentuate the shapes of this painting. This is a very linear or architectural painting here. You can see, dynamic shapes of the front as you see me place this light blue in the front here, which is essentially a backdrop for the cars and the life, quote unquote, life of this painting, the cars, this city of industry, as I call it. It's a city that's alive. So the blue is a backdrop. It adds interest to the front, the foreground, but also complements the warm hues of the background. So in your own work, color, you can go in any one direction, high contrast, unconventional, limited palette. This painting is very limited, even though, as you recall from most of my work, there's a lot of color, but they are tonalist in nature. You could do glowing lights, reflections. In all of my cityscape work, I do various reflections, whether it's raining or not raining. I always add interest through reflections. And of course, you can play with color temperature for additional mood. At this stage of the painting, I'm quite happy with the overall, if you want to call it, backbone. So the fundamentals, I've laid down the lights and darks. I've got interest with color. I'm quite happy with the way that the whole painting is reading. And now at this point, I am refining it. So I'm adding some realistic components to it. And of course, I will be adding some, as you can see in that finished painting on the right, some lights, some life to the foreground. I'm using for the first time, this large palette knife followed by this small palette knife. So a lot of tools in front of me, my palette's directly in front of me. That's part of the reason why I didn't place it to the side of my painting as I usually do in these videos, because it was so big and there's so many puddles of color on there that I couldn't sort of manage everything. I'm standing for this particular tutorial as opposed to sitting for some of the other ones I've done. But I'm refining this painting at this point. So this is one of those things where it's somewhat difficult to teach. So the refining stage could take anywhere from, half an hour to an hour to, days on end, really. It's just a question of how far you're willing to push it. So as I zoom in here for some of the detail work, I'll show you what level of refinement I chose to sort of follow for this particular piece. As I said before, this whole painting was done with mark making tools like the squeegee brush and brayer and so on. I didn't use brushes, not as a gimmick, it's just I enjoy, and this is just something that I've done throughout the years. I enjoy using these tools and the kind of marks that they make. So what I'm doing now is I'm refining some shapes to define obviously that distant building, to create interest, but also, as I'll be doing in a second with a smaller squeegee tool, add compositional lines, so windows to a building, certain divisions within a building, lines, architectural divisions, and so on and so forth, that add sort of visual perspective, if you want, some sort of guide as to what exactly you're looking at, perspective on the distance of the building, and so on and so forth. But beyond what you see here in this close-up, I don't go any further, at least not lately, with the work. In a minute here in this video, I will take you down memory lane, if you want, and show you some of the works that I've done throughout the years, cityscape work, and I'll let you be the judge. What style you like more. Some of the earliest works that I've done some 20 years ago or more, all the way up to this type of style, which I mostly employ nowadays. You'll notice when I use this particular tool, the silicone brush, the smaller one, and the two larger ones, I use them, as I was mentioning earlier, to apply paint or remove paint, but also when applying paint, as you will notice here, I am putting paint with one side or maybe putting it with the other side. These tools have two sides, one smaller, one larger. You can, as I said, define shapes like the rooftop up there, or put these indications of windows in those buildings with a smaller side. So they are versatile in that sense, in that you've got two sides to work with that you can wipe right away with your other offhand if you want. As I now get close to completing this painting, let me now show you my works from yesteryears. First one here is from around 2002, and it depicts a cold day in Montreal. This is a large oil on board painting that's very refined, very photo-like, that has limited soft edges, well, to some extent, but mostly just very hard edges, and it's very time consuming and little stylizing. The next one here is from a few years thereafter, maybe around 2010, and depicts a young Dundas Square for all you Canucks here in Canada, and it shows a painting that's relatively refined as well, but it shows some stylizing and some deviation from 100% representational rendering. Lastly, we have this piece from around 2020 or so, so about 5 years ago. This again is from Toronto, Queen's Park area, and there's a lot of stylizing going on, so I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the years, maybe it's my vision failing me or whatever. It's just the way that this style of mine, and it's a common thing for a lot of artists as they age, their work becomes looser and more expressive, and so on and so forth. I just like the stylizing and expressive mark making that I am sharing with you here, and that I enjoy making every day. But I'm keen on hearing your opinion. So what do you think? Do you enjoy some of the work that I do now with this paint layering and scratching and adding and removing, or do you enjoy more of the refined work that I used to do way back when I was just out of art school? Let me know. At this end stage of the painting, I'm usually reducing things or erasing things to simplify the overall composition, whether it's just too busy with regards to shapes, too many marks, so on and so forth. But I am known to add things as well, as I did just there, add some direct yellow ochre from the tube into that central section. I just thought it was interesting to see, and it sort of played well against the background warmth. I added more warmth in the foreground. But again, there's no rules with these sorts of things. You can, even at this stage of the painting, when you're all the way at the end, when it's all based on certain intuition and not representational rendering, I'm not unknown to even do something like I'm doing right there, add a squeegee and add some more interesting marks that are missing. Here I'm just sort of removing paint and adding some lines across to add more of a dynamic look to the overall composition. Now on to that gimmick that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. If you work on a loose canvas, or like in my case here, a mylar sheet, you should not be limited by the dimensions you started out with. So this is something I learned a long time ago. A lot of times I do this, I paint on loose canvas or these sheets, because you have an added option, if need be, to cut off a piece of your substrate to strengthen the composition, which in fact I did with this particular piece. The left side was, I felt, in excess, if you want. It was just taking away from the overall look. Maybe it was the converging lines, or I'm not sure entirely, but I cut it off and I think it was more impactful. As I zoom in here for you to view the final piece up close, I want you to pay attention to the marks and the layers, all of the layers that are sort of showing through in certain sections, dynamic mark making, and just the overall feel and mood and the drama of the piece that you yourself can also attain with your work. If you follow some of the suggestions, I guess, hopefully you've picked up a trick or two along this video. I want you to thank you again for watching and supporting this channel. As promised, I hope, God willing, next week we will do another figurative work, allegorical work that I am excited to share. Here I'll link the video from last week, as promised, that goes more into depth about using cold wax. Let me know what you think. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.